We really want the episodes produced through this project to shift the listener's mind about the limitations of BVI individuals, both the students and the teachers.
Please welcome Sara Robberson Lentz.
We'll be also creating a curriculum for teaching both sighted and BVI students how to podcast in the classroom as a tool for them to share their own knowledge.
COO and Head of Partnerships at Tumble Media and STEM Education Officer at AUI.
Yeah, our latest episode is a fun one with the soundscapes from the James Webb Telescope, which I think is just really exciting.
And without further ado, here's Sara. We hope you enjoy. Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson. Today in the studio, we have Sara Robberson Lentz, and she's the COO and Head of Partnerships at Tumble Media and STEM Education Officer at AUI. Sara, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Sara, why don't you tell us a little bit about Tumble Media?
Sure. So Tumble Media is a kids educational podcasting company. We currently have 3 podcasts that are out for people to listen to. We have our flagship podcast, Tumble Science Podcast for Kids. And then we have Tumble en Español, which is the first ever Spanish adaptation of a kids podcast. And then we have a yoga podcast for younger listeners.
And I saw on the podcast for kids, 186 episodes.
Yeah, I'd have to go check that number because it's so many I have lost track, but that sounds about right. We're about to launch our 8th season in a couple of weeks. And
I just saw the James Webb Telescope one just dropped. That's how I know it was 186, because that dropped just as I was looking at it. All of a sudden it popped up and it's like, hey, a brand new one today.
Yeah.
Hear that? That's cosmic cliffs in the Carina Nebula, made from an image captured by the James Webb Space Telescope and turned into sound.
Wow, that's really beautiful. But how do you turn an image into sound?
A team of scientists and musicians, working with a member of the blind and visually impaired community, assigned different musical notes to the colors or frequency of light in the images. Then they played the image from left to right.
So that's actually during the summer, we tend to do re-releases and give some updates on stories that we really loved. And James Webb Telescope has been, I'm sure you've read all over the news, just like amazing things coming out of it. And recently a team of scientists released soundscapes of some of the images that have been collected. So we did sort of an update on that episode. And then the episode itself was actually recorded before the telescope launched. And it was interviewing the engineer who helped design the telescope and was part of the team that figured out how is this giant, the biggest telescope we've ever launched, how do we get it out into space and how does it unfold itself without breaking? I
also like that in the show notes there's some links so you can go to the sonification, the sounds. There's links to that. There's links to other information about it too. So it's quite a great resource.
Thank you. Yeah, we come at it. We're 2 of us, Lindsay and I, are both science reporters. And then Marshall, who's the co-host, is an educator and has been teaching for over 20 years. So we kind of combined those, and we're really thinking about teachers and parents who want to allow their young learners to go further into our stories with everything that we make.
So podcasts as a medium for education, that's kind of a new approach. I mean, a lot of people 7 years ago when you started podcasts, you'd have to explain to them what a podcast was, but now it can be used as an educational tool.
Absolutely. We have seen that so much in the kids space of first, we had to prove, do kids even listen to podcasts? There weren't any podcasts for kids out there really. And we had to really go in and show that kids are listening, kids are engaged. And now we're really trying to show that they can be engaged in the classroom as well. We have teachers that write in from all over the world who use our podcasts in the classroom. And that's been really such an inspiration for us. And we just want to keep diving into that deeper. It's just such a part of our mission to have science be more multifaceted. We just don't want it to just be about learning stuff for a test. We want people to, be able to understand science and to have conversations about science. And so we think storytelling is just such an important part of science education.
Either I got a little kid in me or I'm interested in science because I saw the road trip, Journey to the Center of Your Brain. And I'm like,
Hi, Tumble listeners. We're still here on our summer break, and I'm embarking on another magical adventure. This time, the expert shrinkologists at Tumble HQ shaped up and shrunk me down so I can ride on a microscopic submarine to explore the human brain. we're making our way up to the cranium, but while we're journeying, here's some great Tumble episodes about the brain for you. We hope you enjoy. Avast ye swabs, let's dive into our first episode. Do dreams have meaning? That's right, dive! Oh no, it's an antibody.
Yeah, we actually have a lot of adult listeners as well who write in. And we've also have quite a few listeners who are English language learners, who are scientists, who really love our show too, because it's a great way for them to learn scientific terms in English and be able to be pulled into the storytelling in an approachable way.
Well, I like the storytelling part of it the most, the podcast medium, because it takes the visual out of it. And me being visually impaired, it's automatically audio described in a sense that you put it in a fashion where you're going to understand it by the words you're using and describing, and the music is good too, that it's accessible. It's inclusive just by default almost. But you guys are doing a big initiative towards that through the National Science Foundation grant that you were awarded. Well, the team was awarded, and you're part of that team.
Yes, thank you. Well, we recently were awarded an iTest grant, which stands for Innovative Technology Experiences for Students and Teachers. And it was a little over $1 million to fund a large team effort to explore that exact question. I mean, I think intuitively, we think podcasts are accessible, but are they? To what extent is the language we use in podcasting actually accessible? How much do we rely on potentially having past visual experiences in our storytelling? And then also, is the podcast technology itself accessible? We have an amazing dream team of Associated Universities, Inc., where I have a dual appointment with them and with Tumble Media, working with Tim Spuck there, and then Oregon State University with their STEM Education Research Center, Kelly Redinger and Martin Stortsteek, and Independent Science, which is an amazing organization of blind and visually impaired scientists who work towards making science education more accessible. So together, we've been working over the last year and a half on this idea, and we're so excited that it got funded and we get to dive in.
STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and some people want to include arts, so they call it STEAM.
Yes.
That's an interesting area because that's kind of one of the areas in education that blind and visually impaired students have been excluded from. I remember when I took astronomy and we had a lab component to it that the teacher says, I don't know how you're going to do the lab thing. And I said, well, we'll see. And it was interesting, but that was a few years back when it wasn't, inclusive wasn't the key word running around the corporations and businesses and schools, education area. And now it's changed a little bit, and STEM is the main focus of what your team will be doing.
I think your personal story there hits home for me as I'm new to this space and learning more about stories of BVI scientists. And we put in our proposal a story about Mona Mikara, who is a computational bioengineer who has been very public about her obstacles as a BVI scientist, not her own limitations, but rather the limitations that were imposed on her by her teachers, with people just generally confused and coming with this misconception that only non-disabled people can do science. So we really believe there's a power here for podcasts to counter that misconception. And we really want the episodes produced through this project to shift the listener's mind about the limitations of BVI individuals, both the students and the teachers.
I think it's an important part about the teachers component, because when you go into the institutions and the curriculums for teaching, that the teachers need to know how to teach or have an idea how to do it. And I was looking at the Tumble Media website. You have an actual section for teachers where they can gather. I mean, this initiative hasn't gone yet, but teachers can actually get information, worksheets, and kind of a little miniature curriculum to some of the episodes.
Yes. And that's the goal throughout this 3-year project. We'll be working with groups of teachers, both in inclusive classrooms and BVI-specific classrooms, to really evaluate not only the episode's effectiveness, but creating an entire catalog of materials that will be made public, free for teachers to use in the future to incorporate podcasting into their STEM learning.
Independent Science, I read the article, and they'll be traveling around to study this and basically take notes, and this all come back and be compiled, and then your job kind of well, I shouldn't say what your job is, but your part is to put it into an educational type of format.
Yeah. So my job, I'm the principal investigator on the project, is really sort of a captain's chair position, project management of bringing everybody together. So we have so many strong partners that are all experts in what they do. And so my job is to help facilitate them working together on their independent pieces and then bring everyone's work into like a cohesive whole. So independent science is going to be playing a really important role in consulting us in the BVI space. And then they'll be partnering both with Oregon State University in the research they will conduct early on in the project around current attitudes around BVI in the classroom, resources, pitfalls, using podcasts in the classroom. And then Marshall Escamilla, who is the co-host of Tumble Science Fact for Kids, is actually leading the education initiative where he's going to be working with an advisory board of teachers to create a curriculum around the findings from the research.
And at some point, that'll be available for the masses.
Yes, that will all be available on a public website that will be built by Independent Science. So we make sure that all of the materials are fully accessible with tactile graphics and, make sure that the web technology is also fully accessible.
Yeah, because I think inclusion in the classroom is one of the biggest parts of it. That same day, the same moment something is happening, that there is some form, some way of participating as a peer.
Absolutely. And I think we would really like to show how podcasts can help broaden the participation for BVI students. We're specifically focusing on upper elementary school students and using our show as a model, but then providing that for both teachers, but then other podcasts who are interested in creating content for the classroom of this is how you can do it to actually effectively impact learning outcomes and make teachers' lives easier, hopefully, in the long run.
So the teachers can actually help get some local podcasts out for their students to learn from as well.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've been in college where a teacher has this handbook or a little pamphlet or something they created. I've never been in a situation where a teacher had a podcast. So that's interesting.
Yeah, there's so many tracks and we're continuing to tighten this as we launch in October. But one of the other parts we really want to focus on is both the content of podcasting, which we've been talking about, but then also the process of podcasting, which you know so well. And how can that be a tool for the students themselves to enter into conversations? Can they make podcasts? Instead of writing a paper, could they make a podcast about a report? Or could they engage in interviewing? And we'll be also creating a curriculum for teaching both sighted and BVI students how to podcast in the classroom as a tool for them to share their own knowledge.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you got tonight? I got to write 2 papers, or now it'll be, I got to do 2 podcasts and a paper.
Yeah. And it's such a great, there's so many tools out there. It's become so much more accessible in terms of like cost. Anyone with a cell phone, really, some sort of smartphone or access to like a laptop or a tablet can do podcasting. And so we just really want to present like the guidelines out there for the technical side of it and the storytelling side of it so that they can get practice doing that.
What got you interested in podcasts? 7 years ago, that's when it was basically giving birth to podcasting.
Yeah.
I remember those days you'd have to explain it like, okay, Mom, a podcast is like a radio show, but you can take it anywhere you want at any time.
Exactly. Oh, how did I get into podcasting? Well, so I always thought, honestly, that I was going to be a scientist. I have like a STEM background. I'm going to college. I just always assumed that was what I was going to do from very, very early on. And then in college, it just really struck me how many people kept themselves from learning anything about science. Like, forget just taking a science class. Like, they didn't even want to read the news about it or really learn about it because they had sort of separated themselves from that world and thought, this isn't something I can get into. So I sort of got into science writing as an effort to pull more people into the science conversation. And then I was listening to Radio Lab at my office job as an editor and just immediately fell in love. And this was like in 2011. And then I went to a pretty prestigious sound workshop called the Transom Story Workshop, where we got really great training from all of the greats within the audio world. And they were really big on podcasts. It was a lot of radio people, but people were saying, oh, podcasting is so great because you can push the medium and you can do things that are different and you're not constrained to the 3-minute slot like you would be on the radio. So that's really how I got into it, was just sort of this love for this very intimate form of storytelling, longer form and conversational. Yeah.
Well, with Tumble Media, I see some of the episodes. I've skimmed through and looked at the titles. It's all educational. What twist did you bring in to go for kids and then educational? I mean, I suppose wanting more people into science, that fed right into it.
Yeah. So Lindsay and I always joke that in public radio and science writing in general, you sort of write for a 5th grade level anyways, because that's where the average adult science literacy actually stops. So when we translated that into writing for kids, it's not a huge difference in terms of really trying to break something down. In audio, you have to really be focused on what you're telling and have a very simplified way of talking about complex subjects. It's very different than you would if you had some sort of second layer of a visual medium. And so translating that into then talking to kids was a very quick leap for us. And then it's just bringing in more humor and the topics we focus on. We love to go off of kids' questions. One of our favorite episodes is where we found out that trees do in fact fart.
Which is why today we're sharing the story behind a really silly question that leads to some serious science. Here's the question.
Mom, do trees fart?
Did I just hear, do trees fart?
Yes, you did. You heard the 3-year-old daughter of Mary Heskell. Mary Heskell's a plant biologist. Her daughter first came up with this question in order to avoid going to bed.
Things like that are how we like to bring in some fun, lighthearted things that teach us bigger lessons about the world.
I saw the one, The Science of Butts.
Oh, it's great. If you haven't listened to it, it's wonderful.
Yeah, it was just so interesting. Like I said, the kid inside me or the science inside, I think it's the science inside me that just never grows up. I just keep going through that list and all of a sudden it's like inquisitive. Now I got some stuff to listen to and I will be listening to it.
We love that. That's our whole mission, is to inspire curiosity through the stories of science discovery. How did scientists find out something? How do they know what they know? And that brings anyone can be a part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. How has working on the STEM project and blind, visually impaired, has that made you take a look back to see what you were doing in your previous podcast and what you might do in the future? Has it changed anything?
That's a great question. At this point, that's exactly what we're doing. So the study is over 3 years, and we will produce 3 episodes every year of the study that feature blind and visually impaired scientists in the format as we normally do. And then they will go through this rigorous process of evaluation each year. And then we will have to iteratively improve on how the podcast is. It gets into the ears of listeners, what our language is. I think that's been the biggest eye-opening thing for me in talking to the people from independent science, even this early in the project. Is the language I'm using accessible? Not just that the audio is accessible, but am I describing something in a way that assumes someone has had a similar experience to me? And I think that that's such a great and important lesson for writers to be thinking about, particularly ones who are interested in public engagement.
It's a different level of eloquence, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is great what you're doing. I'm excited to see the results. And when you say it's coming out in 3 seasons, so it'll be available in 1 season, you'll be able to take that in, binge it, and then wait for the next season?
Yeah, so it'll be within our broader RSS feed. So within the Tumble Science Podcast for Kids RSS feed, we will have 3 episodes per season. So that will be focused specifically on this project. And we really hope that they're sort of seamlessly integrated as well. That's a very important part of this, is we want it to feel not othered, right? We want it to feel connected, and it's just one of the many experiences that we're presenting on the show.
And how can people find the podcast?
Yeah, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. So you can find us on Apple Podcasts, is it Google Podcasts or Google Play now, Stitcher, wherever you listen. If you just Google Tumble Science Podcast for Kids, or even honestly Science Podcast for Kids, we'll come right up.
Yeah, I put in Tumble Media and all 3 came up. Boom, right there.
Yeah.
I was curious about the Spanish one, and I thought that was really neat. That's another level of inclusivity.
Yes, and through this project as well, each of the episodes we create will also be adapted into Spanish. And we love that podcast is done with Spanish language partners, La Catalera, and they don't just do like a translation, like it's a full cultural adaptation.
¿Huesos? Eso me va a dar muchas pesadillas.
Sí, los restos de una ballena son como un banquete para todo tipo de criaturas. Si te fijas.
So again, like you're saying, in a whole other level of inclusive language adapting. So we're really excited about that as well. So it will also be available in Spanish.
Well, that's great. Love what you're doing, and thanks for coming on The Blind Abilities. And we've been talking to Sara Robberson Lentz from Tumble Media Incorporated. Thank you, Sara.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you having me on the show. And yeah, our latest episode is a fun one to point people to because it does connect to this project broadly with the soundscapes from the James Webb Telescope, which I think is just really exciting.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We'll put a link to that right down in the show notes. The biggest space telescope in the universe. Not the world, the universe.
Yes.
And a link to your website, www.sciencepodcastforkids.com. And once again, Sara, thank you so much for taking the time to come on The Blind Abilities. And thank you and your team at Associated Universities Incorporated, Oregon State University, and Independent Science. Thank you all.
Thank you.
A special thanks to Marshall for the wonderful music straight from the Tumble Media Library.
When we share
what we see through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between the limited
expectations
and the reality
of blind abilities.
And the realities of blind abilities.
For more podcasts with the blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com and subscribe to the Blind Abilities Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities. Email info@blindabilities.com. Reach us at 612-367-6093. Give us some feedback, some suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. And from all of us here at Blind Abilities, thank you for listening. And until next time, bye-bye.